Hi everyone, my name is Cassie. First of all, I would like to say thank you to D'Angela for offering me to come on board and celebrate Dirty Mind and Graffiti Bridge with you all. I'm really excited to be here today, and my paper is called New Power Style, Graffiti Bridge, Bodywear and Self-Expression, and I'm going to be speaking about the two greatest loves of my life, Prince and fashion. So, in 1980, Prince began his revolution, adopting a risque uniform for his Dirty Mind record, consisting of customised trench coat, bikini briefs, stockings, and heels. 10 years later, with the release of his fourth film and corresponding album Graffiti Bridge, the purple provocateur was now dressing for salvation. And this talk today is going to analyse a selection of key Graffiti Bridge costumes and discuss the role these garments played in Prince's emerging style. The term bodywear will apply to garments worn by Prince that are both cut and worn close to the natural body. And I'm going to discuss how Prince negotiated self-expression through clothing, in particular his developing spirituality and sexuality, and the subsequent impact this had on his style for the new decade. So 6 years on, Graffiti Bridge picks up kind of where Purple Rain left us, with the Kid and Morris Day still bickering over the local club scene. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the film because I know we're going to be covering it extensively across the weekend. But the film is essentially a thinly veiled commentary between spirituality versus greed, love versus lust, the sacred versus the profane. So these are all common Prince tropes used within his creative output that we know. And visually, the film looks sensational. It looks like Blade Runner with the neon backlots and the kind of gritty alleyways. But ultimately, Prince's self-directed project fails for a number of reasons. But that's not to say that you can't have a lot of good fun when you're watching this film. Of course, Prince and his band adopted a new uniform for the project, this time inciting a whole new generation of purple hippies with their new power style. This is what I'm going to be celebrating today with you all. And just before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out to those that contributed to the costumes of the film. Helen Hyatt and Jim Sheeran, Sister Daniels, Sarah Dobney, Lou Irick and David Madrick. All costumes were created by Paisley Park in the wardrobe department, aside from Jill Jones' wardrobe, which was designed by Tunisian fashion designer Azzedine Alia. So, fashion professor Jennifer Craik states, when pop and rock culture developed in the 1960s, the strategic use of official and quasi-uniforms in the language of radicalism was reinforced. Here, the adoption of quasi-uniforms was an effective means to establishing distinctive identities and recognition and identification with these audiences, as well as making social comment and attracting growing media and public interest in this burgeoning phenomenon. So Prince needed a uniform to start his revolution back in 1980. And we know that he did this with the materialisation of the DIY punk trench coat. And by the time Purple Rain came around, this look had crystallised into this purple dandy that had merged into a kind of cornucopia of subcultures. And following the astronomical worldwide success of the film and album, Prince stepped away from his purple visage and began to experiment with silhouette, fabric, and colour. 6 years on, after the success of the film, the Kid appears again. We're reintroduced to him. He's almost evangelical in comparison, wearing monochromatic loose vestments over skin-tight, flesh-bearing bodysuits. And percolating alongside the musicians developing spirituality, the refined new power style seen in Graffiti Bridge heralded Prince into the new age. The kids' costumes aside, Graffiti Bridge visually reflects emerging youth trends of the early 1990s, with representations of streetwear, grunge, and club kids, to name a few, within 7 corners. Purple scholar Scott Wood states that Prince's multiple reinventions were accessorised with new utopias. And we, of course, see that in Prince's Minneapolis in Purple Rain and 7 corners in Graffiti Bridge. There are a lot of similarities between these two films, particularly the focus of subcultures and youth. Purple Rain saw the kid dressed in his now iconic new romantic finery, a subcultural style rooted in historical clothing, juxtaposed with gender fuck and glam rock that came to influence the mainstream fashion by the time the mid 1980s hit. The purple trench coat, the ruffled jabot, and skin-tight ruched pants are forever entrenched in our popular culture minds, and they reflect a hyper version of contemporary subcultures at the time. In comparison, the fashion worn by the kids in Graffiti Bridge represents a more finely tuned, understated style that is perhaps more reflective of Prince as a man at that point. So, did Graffiti Bridge show a more authentic visual representation of the artist? Was the stripped back fashions an indicator of his maturing spirituality and relationship with God? His visual representation in the film, although on the surface appears more conventional, can offer us a more in-depth understanding of the artist during this period in his career. So we are reintroduced to the kid with the opening performance of New Power Generation. And Prince demands us to lay down our funky weapon, your old-fashioned music, your old ideas. The kid is dressed head to toe in black, his look heavily layered, each garment cut to expose flesh. First, a loose fishnet long-sleeve crop top, which is worn under a skin-tight one-sleeved unitard with self-covered buttons on the side of his legs. The outfit is finished with a sleeveless crop tabard with a delicate gold waist chain and heels. An early rendition of the love symbol appears on the back of both the tabard and wraparound for the heels. There is strong power within this look, and it's juxtaposed with the traditional masculine stacked shoulder pads and then the soft fluidity of the stretched fabrics as they cut across the body. A strong angular silhouette complements the battle cry of the song New Power Generation. And Prince is surrounded by his newly formed band, who mirror Prince's all-black ensemble, but are heavily styled with streetwear staples such as berets, braces, studded waist belts, and an abundance of gold chains. And these looks are not a far cry from fashion designers such as Dolce & Gabbana and Versace, and we know he loved Versace at this point. But they were also a direct reference to the kind of growing hip-hop scene as well. And this look, like I say, exuded power. It signalled he was back. The kid was back. Prince was back with a new song, a new power behind him. The New Power Generation, and it signalled a shift in both his music and his aesthetics. One of the key garments worn by Prince in the film is the black leather motorcycle jacket. And the motorcycle jacket has, of course, been associated with youth and rebellion and is synonymous with the depiction of the outsider. And following the success of films such as The Wild One, the motorcycle jacket increased in popularity in America as civilian wear. And then it enjoyed a revival with the counterculture in the 60s. And in the 70s, it kind of blew up and became a kind of symbolic garment worn by punks and rockers. In wearing the customised motorcycle jacket, Prince represented the black rebel, the black outsider. But instead of wearing traditional workwear such as blue jeans, white collar t-shirts, these type of things, he wears skin-tight bodywear that shows off his physique. So you're welcome for this picture. I know it's everyone's favourite. So he wasn't just wearing any old battered up motorcycle jacket. This garment had noticeably been augmented to reflect Prince's unique style. There was black leather tassels and one absent sleeve. The gold metal symbol of the love symbol protrudes from the back of the garment, and these symbols were commissioned by Paisley Park through Minnesotan jewellery designer Liz Buckheit. And when I spoke to Liz Buckheit about the symbol, I was wondering whether or not this was raised, because it is raised quite a lot, a couple of inches off, and it's pinned into the jacket. And I thought this was a kind of very literal way of the designers kind of exuding Prince's strength, and don't touch him. He's tough. He's New Power Generation. He's coming in with a new look, and he's untouchable. But when I spoke to Liz, she explained that because the brass may oxidize the fabric underneath, so a tough leather underneath, they had to set the symbol above so that it wasn't going to oxidize and change the colour and the patina of the fabric, which I thought was really interesting. And she also expressed that Prince was obsessed with the pairing of gold and black at the time. And we know what happens when Prince gets obsessed with colours, he wears them. So that's why I think you see gold and black coming up a lot in Graffiti Bridge and through the nude tour. And you can see the unusual gold trimmings in the black motorcycle jacket. Slightly cropped, the jacket is cut close to the body and features an unusual one-sleeve design detail that casts doubts on the jacket's perceived functionality. Underneath the jacket, Prince wears softer stretch garments, the jacket acting as a protective shell amongst the streets of Seven Corners. In the place of a gang insignia on the back is the gold metal love symbol, and that exudes a couple of inches, as I mentioned. Mirroring Prince's fashion worn in the film, the metal symbol was clean, graphic, and bold. And wearing symbols and text upon his body was not unusual for Prince. We know that. We know that he did this in Sign of the Times, Love Sexy, Parade. These were, he was using things like a love heart, a peace symbol, and these were worldwide signifiers for positivity and strength and love. Wearing the love symbol literally embedded into his clothing signalled the importance of the emerging design within his work and his world. And this was not the first time, of course, that Prince had worn a motorcycle jacket, with variations of the style being worn in films like Under the Cherry Moon and Purple Rain, with the tweed motorcycle jacket that is a kind of nod to James Brown. There is a distinct design development from Prince's early trenchcoat prototypes of Dirty Mind to the fringed motorcycle jacket we see in Graffiti Bridge. All these garments are key signifiers of youth, rebellion, uprising, revolution. And by branding the jacket with the emerging symbol, Prince was again defining his visual identity for a new audience for a new decade. Okay, I'm a massive ska fan, especially as a teenager, two-tone, everything. So this is one of my all-time favourite Prince looks, the elephant and flowers kaftan. So the kid wears a two-tone asymmetrical tunic with a pleated draped shoulder with high oversized Mondrian collar, which we know Prince loves. He wears colour block tight trousers and mismatching heeled boots with stylised early love symbol toe caps, fashioned again by Liz. The shoes were a collaboration between Buck Height and London-based shoemaker Cos Kyra Achu. The toe decorative detailing proved very difficult because they couldn't actually affix it to the tip of the shoe, and they wanted it to still remain functional when he was dancing, but they did sort it out in the end, and I think it works really, really well because it adds a little bit of pizzazz to Prince's dancing, and it kind of adds a glint. It really focuses the viewer into Prince's footsteps, basically. And this is a really, really great example of costume working alongside performance, with the kaftan moving alongside the musician, almost dancing alongside Prince. And the song speaks of spiritual awakening and freedom and love and acceptance, with Prince's reverence and joy exuding throughout the performance. And this kaftan just dances and flows flows in the air along with Prince, just freeing himself. And it's a really beautiful moment. In studying Prince's clothing, particularly in the late 70s and throughout the 1980s, I often think about the Austrian designer Rudi Grenrich, who's one of my favourite designers. He designed avant-garde unisex garments like the monokini, the thong for men, and gender-neutral kaftans. He was a dancer himself, so he was aware of the importance of freedom of movement. And these unisex garments were basically symbolised the ever-changing sexual politics of the late 60s and 70s. And they burst with kinetic energy and emancipated the wearer, whether it was a woman or man wearing them. He was a dancer, as I said, and so he knew that this freedom of movement, both mentally and physically, was really, really important. And in 1968, Rooney Grenick said of his designs, it was not just freeing for the body, it freed the spirit as well. And Prince's addition of loose-fitting capes and long-sleeved oversized blouses literally freed the body. Bodywear such as this was key in allowing for ease of movement. He wasn't wearing abundance of materials. It wasn't restrictive clothing. It was stretch. It was free. It was loose, and this allowed him to express his developing relationship with God and his developing relationship with himself. Prince was getting older. He was learning more things about himself, and this kind of freeing garment allowed him to express this. Sociologist Joanne Entwistle explains dress lies at the margins of the body and marks the boundary between self and other, individual and society, and that this boundary is intimate and personal. This boundary remained intimate for the musician, particularly early on in his career, when Prince often wore revealing skin-tight bodywear. The kids' wardrobe in Graffiti Bridge relies heavily on separates and layering of these various body garments. The asymmetrical shouldered unitard is a key piece of the museum's wardrobe at this time. He wears it all throughout the nude tour as well, and prior to that as well with Batman. By wearing such tight clothing, often in reflective materials, Prince offered a visual vulnerability which expressed, like this kind of softer side. But was it vulnerability or was it exhibitionism? In true Gemini form, it's probably a bit of both. He was experimenting with erogenous zones. He was experimenting with placement of fabric in different places of his body to conceal and reveal. And this was a style that he favoured and he used throughout the rest of his career. And we know as well that unitards, jumpsuits, things like that, they were so popular with male musicians in the 60s and the 70s because they were easy to move in, but they were also easily adapted to reflect the personality, the persona of the performer, like the Little Richard onesies and the James Brown sex jumpsuits, which are like direct influence for Prince. The leotard was designed in the latter half of the 19th century through a trapeze artist, and he designed a tight-fitting one-piece garment, originally designed for men. These garments basically are full coverage from head to toe, and they allow for ease of movement, but they also show off the physical form. This is quite important in dancing, to see the muscles and the tendons and all these things. And by the 1970s, leotards and unitards were becoming commonplace in both the discotheques and also exercise classes. And we know that Prince was wearing Danskins at this time, a popular dance brand. So we know that he was wearing these things. He was wearing disco pants. And the one-shouldered unitard worn by Prince in Graffiti Bridge is interesting because it was layered with a reveal. And it's clear that Prince understood the importance of clothing, that the importance it can have on a performance and the role it can play in emoting the song. And during Tick Tick Bang, Prince is very cocksure and playful as he prances around on stage, and he rips off his blouse to reveal Beat Me. And this kind of burlesque performance really showed off Prince's understanding of how clothing is integral to a performance. Bodywear allowed Prince both fluidity and comfort, something that was important to him. And these garments, these high-waisted dance leggings, these vests, these unitards basically went with him throughout his career and throughout his life as well, his personal life. When asked by presenter Rennie Seiler of the early show in 2004 about his controversial formative years and explicit lyrics, Prince answered, "One thing I always tried to keep was sensuality in the music. And this sensuality between self and body was identified within his clothing. Prince's crotch consciousness transcended overt displays of traditional hegemonic masculinities with a focus on self-expression through freedom. There is always an apparent tactility with Prince as he strokes and caresses his own body through stretch fabrics, silks, and these unusual cutouts and erogenous zones were recreated and shifted to unconventional places, particularly for a man." I must tell you, I had a lot of fun bringing all these images together. So Prince subverts traditional masculine silhouettes, and with the Thebes in the Temple look, he really kind of flips this on the head. He subverts this traditional silhouette and reveals the tops of his thighs and buttocks, not the full thigh, not the full buttock, just a little, a little taste. And whilst performing, you can tell that Prince is really reveling in this. He's teasing the audience by lifting up his blouse and giving them that little kind of slick of flesh that they can see. He does a little air hump as well to see the jewel detailing around his derriere. And these cutouts and strategic embellishment placement give the impression of a garter belt, similar to the Dirty Mind look. And this burlesque follows on from the flashy provocateur of Dirty Mind and the midriff bearing Christopher Tracy. The film's penultimate scene is a performance of Still Would Stand All Time, and in stark contrast to the high energy Purple Rain encore, he appears almost underdressed here. This is Prince's I woke up like this moment. His hair is perfectly coiffed. Is he wearing makeup? Is he not wearing makeup? He's definitely wearing makeup. But he looks very understated, very, very chic and pared back for Prince. And performance-wise, it's a very kind of regal performance. There's a lot of religious iconography in this. The way that he clasps his hand in prayer, the way that the white blouse is strategically kind of fallen off his shoulder to show that it's this kind of carefree, but it's a formulated image, and it does appear very evangelical, very religious in performance. And it's almost as if that Prince realised, oh, I've been a bit of a bad boy. I've been showing my thighs and my bums too much, so I have to get back to this kind of understated, restrained Prince. So just to kind of quickly conclude, Prince exposed himself night after night during live performances, both through performance and fashion. And his connection between self and spirituality and sexuality existed in the second skin silhouettes worn throughout his career. This never-ending tug of war between the sacred and the profane is heavily documented. And Graffiti Bridge allows the audience to see a more pared back musician, but it's evident that struggle is ever present, even in his clothing. The costume design of Graffiti Bridge on the surface appears less fantastical than that of the ostentatious curves of Stacia Lang's design or the New Age drapery used later on in his life. But these costumes are important because they offer us a glimpse into Prince's emerging spirituality and the kind of battle that he was facing in 1990, and shows a more vulnerable musician perhaps. So that's why I love these costumes. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.